Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 16 of Paravine's Into the Rift. I'm your host, Daniel Dracos, and joining me tonight on our ever-rotating group of panelists is Dave Troop, Stephen Nguyen, and the man known only as Hermit, or Yoshi, depending on what you want to call him. So we have an exciting week.
You can't give two names and say his only name is something.
Yeah, okay, well, we'll work on it.
You're killing the English language here, man.
I prefer Yoshi.
One word at a time. Gotta ruin that English language. All right. Well, moving forward, we have a couple things to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about roster announcements and all of the wonderful changes that have been going on. We're going to look a little bit at the LCS changes, big changes to both NA and EU, of course, a little bit at OGN in the first week, now known as LCK, and of course, a bit of a preview for LPL and CB Law, both of which are starting later this week. But we're going to get started right off the bat with roster announcements. First up, Ryu joins H2K. So we weren't too surprised by this one, I know, as a panel, but let's go over it at least a little bit. Ryu to H2K, why does this move make sense? Where did this come from?
Well, he did okay at the tournament, right? At the IEM, he wasn't spectacular, but he did fine. And considering that what he has done in his past, I think it's a pretty safe. It's a pretty safe pickup. Okay, well, we've seen what he's all right now, and we've seen that this player is capable of doing amazing things. So it's it's not a terrible gamble, especially in the spring split.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll probably talk about this a little bit later in terms of Febiven, but I think that Febiven is definitely is going to do a lot more for H2K than Ryu did. Febiven, was just a huge threat. Specifically in their series against Reason Gaming, he drew 5 bans in Game 3, and then they first picked another champion away from him. I don't think that Ryu will command that kind of respect from other teams, and so I think that this definitely weakens H2K, but they didn't really have any better options necessarily, and Ryu's a great option, even though stylistically he's not the same, and it definitely changes the team and weakens the team.
And one of the big things here is going to be experience. And despite the language barrier, this is obviously a role that Ryu has a lot of experience on, and it's one of those roles that requires a little bit more of a macro strategy sense that you're not going to get if you pick up someone from solo queue. So despite the fact that you're right, I don't think he's going to have the same impact on the team as a whole compared to Febiven especially, he will still be able to play the role of mid laner at least somewhat proficiently, which is, it's a lot less risky than picking someone up at a challenger or from grabbing from someone else who isn't in the region or hasn't been in the region.
And H2K is a team that has always done pretty well in lane and gone even in lane, and so having a guy that's just going to be solid and go even can't hurt. It's not going to hurt the team.
All right. So Ryu, no surprise. Along with, Ryu and the no surprise, Soaz officially joins Origin.
I think the only surprise there was how long it took for them to announce that, unless they were trying out other top laners.
Yeah.
It's like when TSM didn't want to announce their new jungle for the longest time.
I think they had to wait for Fnatic to make the statement, right? They wanted Fnatic to be able to make this. Maybe they had some deal because they were there for so long. Maybe Fnatic said, hey, do you guys mind waiting to announce Soaz until after we announce this? And Peke's probably not in a rush, so he said, sure. That'd be my guess as to why.
And the new Fnatic team announcement did come out at the exact same time as the Soaz leaving announcement. So I guess that would make sense, maybe just respect to the team for all the time they spent on there.
Because otherwise, you're right. There's no reason for them not to make that announcement a long time ago already.
A big point about Soaz is that I think that some people think he has fallen off, but I think that he's definitely back in meta right now. There are tons of AP champions that are being played. I've seen Victor. I've seen Akali making a comeback. I've seen even Soaz has been playing some Annie in scrims recently, which is a champion that has started in China a little bit. One of the Chinese top laners that recently qualified, Flandra, is a guy who really popularized Annie top. And even LeBlanc top we might see Soaz pick up in the future. So I think he's really back in meta. And I think that being back in meta will help his motivation. If he's playing champions he likes, he's probably going to play the game more.
Right.
If he's allowed to play champions he likes, he's probably going to play the game more. And so I think this is all good. And he and Peke are going to continue to just do what they've always done, which is really dominate the game together.
Mm-hmm. It makes sense because I don't think he ever fell off either. I agree with her. I think it was just like bad structure in terms of practice and making sure all the players are happy. And like you said, yeah, the meta champions. The only thing I'm worrying about is this is the beginning of the season. What happens when September, August rolls around, and what if HP champions aren't there anymore? If they haven't structured a better support system to make sure all the players are practicing properly, what happens to solos then? That's my question.
Yeah, and I think that's the question we have every year about him.
Yeah, he just likes to play the fun champions, right? They kind of go in and out of competitive play based on like how powerful they are at the time generally and how strong tanks are. There's a certain point where
I don't think it was necessarily the fun champions, right? Didn't he say? I might be completely wrong on this, but didn't he say he didn't like playing Renekton even though Renekton was really strong at the time? I think he doesn't play. Doesn't he like not like playing tanks? Please correct me if I'm wrong with that.
No, he
doesn't.
doesn't.
Yeah,
he doesn't really like playing tanks.
Yeah.
He likes playing carries.
Yeah.
And if you look at like the meta, and we had a brief shift, but I mean we saw Shyvana Renekton as like the top lane, and that was it, right? That's all we ever saw. And then of course Maokai became incredibly popular, and like the awkward counters to deal with Maokai. And now I think you're right; it's in a good spot. We're shifting in. We shifted into Lissandra, Gnar, Rumble, which already I think is more beneficial for Soaz to be playing champions like that. And then when you add in those picks that we haven't seen yet, because obviously this is still a very young season, things like that Annie, like that Victor, that people have been trying but maybe have not been able to use quite as much competitively. Like those are the champions that Soaz loves to play. Like,
right.
I mean, give that guy a mage in the top lane and he is going to be more than happy. So I think you're right. I think I would expect good performances at least in the first couple of weeks. Assuming the rest of the team meshes well, but like you said, like the meta shifts pretty consistently, at least once every couple months. So it'll be interesting to see exactly how the team works out as a whole, especially with Soaz.
I still think they'll easily get back into LCS in one split. Like all they have to do is be the best challenger team, and with Peke and how good Soaz is, I mean, and then Mithy is probably one of the best supports in Europe. If you could argue that he's the best, even though he hasn't been playing,
argue that, but. I would argue
at least from when he was playing, right? Yeah. We haven't seen him at the top level of competition either, so it's hard to make like a really strong case, like a really completely convincing case. Like it's still kind of like, have you been watching his scrims? How much do you take from that? But yeah, like I don't see that team not qualifying like very easily too. I think they'll just stomp Challenger.
Yeah, I'll say this about Origin from what I've seen. Soaz amazing and Niels are all good players and will do their jobs effectively. That team lives or dies on the back of Xpeke and Mythe, and if they perform, that team just wins. I mean, there's a particular video on YouTube that Origin themselves posted of a ranked 5s match, and they're down something like 2 or 3K. They have this 5-on-5 fight. They're down, I think, something like 7-17, and Peke just pulls out a quadra kill, and they end up winning the game. I really do think that team lives or dies not on Xpeke and Soaz, but on Xpeke and Mythy, and I think that Mythy's gonna really show up.
Well, not Mythy, but Soaz's performance has never been a question of game to game. It's more like patch to patch. So he's consistent. Between patches. So if this is a good patch for him, he will be a good top laner for the 3 months that this is relevant. And then after that, that's when the question shifts. But I think it's good to know that for now, the question or the focus for the team is the mid laner and that support player as well.
But let's be fair too. When we're talking about Soaz being like off meta and in the tank meta, he was still one of the best top laners in Europe, even doing that, even though he doesn't practice, even though he hates it. So I mean, like, let's be completely honest, right? Like, even in the metas that he was bad at, he was still better than almost everybody else.
Yeah, he's been a top 3,
if not
top
the
laner
best. Yeah,
in every meta.
Yeah. Yep. So I mean, I just don't see like that team would have to collapse so hard that I just don't even understand. Like, it would boggle my mind.
Yeah.
But then again, that NIP thing happened, right? So
You never know. EU can surprise you in so many ways. Continuing on with unsurprising roster news, Nuke Duck officially joins Rockhat. So for those of you who aren't frequent viewers of the show, we had Fly, manager for Rockhat, on here, and he technically couldn't say anything at the time. He was saying that they were going to look forward to Ryu's performance and then something might happen. The hand signal we gave him was this, when he couldn't say anything about a subject, just so we didn't try to drill him on it. And that's basically, he had his hands up like this the whole time Nuke Duck was being discussed. So we, at the show, were able to draw the conclusion for ourselves. And, it's cool to see Nuke Duck officially a part of Rockhat. Ryu obviously has found a new home on H2K and his ever continuing quest to never sit on a team for more than a month. But I like Nuke Duck. Nuke Duck is really exciting. Not a player I've followed too intently. I was impressed with his performance on Lemon Dog. Hermit, I know you have some opinions on Nuke Duck as a player. Would you care to share them?
I think that Nuke Duck really made Lemon Dogs the team they are, or they were.
for sure.
And a lot of people were asking the question about where would Dexter go this season, and I think that Nuke Duck made Dexter look good. Dexter just pretty much had to follow Nuke Duck up, and if you watch a lot of the earlier Lemon Dogs matches, it was just like follow Nuke Duck around, he wins the game for us. As Lemon Dogs got kind of progressed, Mithy took a larger role in shot calling, and that was both good and bad. You saw Nuke Duck's performance take a little bit of a dip as everybody else stepped up. And on Rocket, you have that question, like which Nuke Duck is going to show up. The Nuke Duck at the end of the last time we saw him in Challenger scene, at the end of the kind of tour of Lemon Dogs, or at the Nuke Duck at the beginning of Lemon Dogs, who just like came into the game and hard carried. I personally think that I've heard that he's taking a larger role in shot calling currently, and I think that with an increased role in shot calling, that's going to give him a lot more kind of swagger, confidence. He's going to be able to play his game, and just rock it out, as they say.
Well, that style is exactly why he's going to be such a good fit for Rocket too, right? Because like you're basically taking an aggressive player, and now he actually has a jungle, like in Jankos, instead of, when he did poorly in that tournament, he didn't even do that bad, and his jungle was freaking Hercubot. So, yeah. And playing a Mumu, now you have Jankos, this guy who's like really, really aggressive, always gets first blood, just really strong jungler, maybe the best in Europe right now. You could easily make an argument for it. And you have this guy with Nuke Duck, who was at the time a great mid. Obviously, if he's got picked up by one of the best teams in Europe, people still think that. They still hold that opinion of him. So it'll be interesting to see. I think they could be a very, very scary duo. Like I think that could carry a lot of games.
I think that everybody's biggest question on Rocket is Overpow. And
yeah.
And for me, it would be Woolite personally.
Oh.
Because I saw that Overpow was like he was very consistent in being able to pull out random champions and get like a win on them here, a win on them there. Like he's a very diverse, like very safe, like he can play a lot of things, right? And that's kind of what you want from your top lane, like somebody who can just play, because the meta can change so drastically. You can have tanks, you can have like AP champions, you can have all sorts of different things up there. So for me, it's more like, will I be able to perform at the level that's necessary to be a top European team? There's no doubt in my mind that he's a solid AD carry, but can he be one of the best? Like, can he make sure that his team is one of the best in Europe? I think Overpower will do just fine holding his own in the top lane.
Fair enough. That's fair enough. I can definitely see how you can shift the focus to Woolite and make it make sense.
Yeah. And while there are a lot of unknown factors on Rocket, I think we know that like at least the core set of players has been playing together for a long time, and it's not one of those like it's not a completely fresh roster. So there is, there is a lot that we already know, and it's just a question of is Nuke Duck going to mesh well, and is of course Overpow going to fit well into his new role. It'll be interesting to see. I don't know, like Rockat's a team that has been really hit and miss with me in the past, but I feel like once they hit their stride, then they usually do pretty well. And obviously, I think Nuke Duck is going to be a much better mid laner for the team as a whole. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see them play. I'm excited to see what comes out of EU this season. It's a very exciting exciting season for EU. Lots of big changes. Yeah, how many times can I mess that one up? All right. Speaking of big changes, Fnatic now, of course, losing more than half their roster, or the majority of their roster, to Cyanide left, and of course Soaz and XPeke are now on Origin. Let's talk about the new Fnatic team. For those of you who don't know, it's going to be Huni in the top lane, Reignover in the jungle, Febiven, formerly of H2K, in the mid lane, Steelback, and then of course as ADC, and Yellowstar, the last remaining member, still the support.
I'm not a particular fan of this because I don't claim to know much about Reignover or Huni. Is it Huni or Hui?
Huni.
Huni.
Huni
right?
is the
Right, a
yeah.
different Korean. Okay. Well, I don't I don't like the precedent this is setting because this is starting to say like, okay, we're just gonna pick up Koreans to fill up our roster. That doesn't mean much. I mean, it means more that you have a cohesive roster than just strong stars or whatever. And I don't even think that Reignover or Huni are stars. Reignover didn't do that good in OGN in like the few games he played, and Huni's a solo queue star if I recall correctly.
Do that good. You're being super generous there, Steven. The guy was like 2-6.
He fed the games that they lost to Prime.
Yep, there
Or
we go.
2-4-6 rather.
Well, that's
and just keep in mind it's the games that they lost to Prime.
that just makes
Those
my
are the
point even
games
stronger. Like, why are they just bringing your like Koreans over? Where's the argument for bringing those guys over
Well,
other
to be
possible
fair,
candidates?
I've heard that Huni has done really well in scrims. I'm not exactly sure about the level of his competition. Like, there's a big difference between playing against, for example, Soaz in lane and playing against my personal favorite top laner in Europe, Youngbuck in lane. But I've heard that he's done really well, and that opens the roster up a lot. Reignover, I've heard, has been a little bit of a log in terms of just laying around and rolling there. But I think that Steelback, Huni doing well, gives Steelback a room to kind of grow into his position with this mentor support of Yellowstar. Steelback didn't look the best before the BMC games when he was on SKP, but when he was in BMC, like, he really had strong performances, did really well on Corki, and instantly, or not instantly, but started to put his name up there with the likes of maybe a step below somebody like Niels, who's now on Origin. And I've talked to some of his former managers and coaching staff, and they've said that Steelback's a really mature kid, young, likes to learn, listens well, and so having a person like Yellowstar there, will help him grow into a great player.
And that's a huge confidence booster too, because so many players these days are like, especially in the marksman role or the AD carry role, are like known to be cocky, like known to not want, like known to believe that they are the best and that they know what's up, and that they're the player that gets to go in and make and style on people, that gets to carry in the late game, that gets to be the center of attention. And so having someone who's humble and someone who's willing to learn, especially in a position where they can learn so very much. Obviously, Yellowstar just knows so much about the game. It's kind of like, I want to say like the Chouster Doublelift relationship.
Yeah.
At least for what Doublelift credits for. I don't know actually how much was learned there, but Chouster obviously had a lot of game knowledge and imparted some of it onto Doublelift, although it would appear that some of it didn't quite stick. Solo farming in lane's not always the right choice, but those relationships are important, and being able to learn not just from your coaching staff but also from your fellow players is a sign that no matter where Steelback goes, he can do well, or he can learn and get better.
Well, I think this will definitely be like, okay, here's your chance, bud. Like, you're going to be put with one of the best sports in Europe. If you're not a standout player within a year, then we kind of know, okay, this is kind of just you are what you are. Like, that'll be the end of it. But it'll be interesting to see. I would love to see it break out. Like, it's always nice to see a new guy kind of rise up and, who's this guy? And then he comes out and just destroys everyone. That's always really fascinating, because you're like, where did this guy come from? So I'd like to see him.
Sadly, we don't get to see him rise up, because he's basically just in EU now. He's just on a high-tier LCS team, just gets to
Wow.
jump into it with a new roster.
He was on
don't know.
SKP.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. So yeah, he
I-
does have a bit of a rising story, but we don't get to see him like rise with the same team. Like for me, it's hard to compare any narrative to the Cloud9 narrative, which is still
Sure.
one of my favorites.
Well, I think mentality-wise, he's also a really, really, really good fit for Fnatic, because you have Febiv in there, who's pretty famous for wanting to be that player who styles on people and just carries the game.
And does so, to be fair, pretty frequently. So
Yeah, and like I talked about him before, he has a really deep champion pool, and plays a lot of assassin, so he does so.
all right, new Fnatic, exciting. Lots of questions remaining to be answered. We'll see exactly how they do in the first couple weeks of the LCS. But moving over to NA now, LMQ rebranding to Team Impulse, and now with a 80% new roster, Zhao Wei Zhao in the mid lane. The only player to remain, we have Impact in the top lane, formerly of SKT, swapped out for Marin this season. Marin obviously playing phenomenally. Be curious to see how Impact does in NA. Rush, and then Apollo, formerly Wiz Fusion, is that right?
Wiz Fusion.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Adrian, who is a relatively unknown player to me, as their support. So kind of similar to Fnatic in the sense that it is a 80% new roster. Although a lot of these pickups are a lot less. I'm a lot less excited about these pickups as I was with the Fnatic team, which I think a lot of the players have good strengths that I know a lot about, whereas these players are mostly unknown to me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see Rush because he was number 1 in the Korean solo queue ladder as a jungler. So it'll be interesting to see, like, okay, like you're the highest rated player by playing jungle in a region. So let's see, can you translate that to competitive play? Because jungle is the most cerebral position, right? You have to really think even harder because now you're not outthinking people on an individual level, but you have to outthink a whole group of people who are playing together, and you have to somehow evade that and make plays still. So I'm really excited to see him perform, but I mean, I don't really know anything about Adrian. Wiz Fusion, I think we've seen enough of to know kind of where he stands. Like he's kind of a top-level challenger, low-level LCS, kind of like on that border AD carry. Like we've never really seen him do better, right? So that's kind of where I'd rank him as a player. So, I mean, I'm not excited. I mean, we'll see about that bot lane. We've never seen this Adrian guy, but the likelihood that he's going to be some god-tier support that just comes out of nowhere and just destroys everybody's. So their bot lane is probably going to be pretty bad. It's going to probably be like last year where they're going to have to rely on Wei Xiao to kind of carry them and hope that that this jungler can help them do that.
Yeah, and I definitely wonder about how Rush is going to transition to Five's play. Clearly he's got a lot of individual skill, and with somebody like Faker and a great coaching staff that transitioned well, being top of the Korean ladder. But I think jungle is probably the hardest position
Yes.
to transition over.
Mhm.
And it's really great that I believe Adrian speaks Korean. If not, I'm very sorry. But I think it's really great that he can form a synergy with particularly Impact, because Impact has always been one of my personal favorite top laners, and Impact is a guy who plays the 2v2 pretty well, and did so when he was on SKT with Bengi.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
We'll-
I really
we'll
like
see.
Impact because, I mean, yeah, he's had some bad games in the past year, but I always thought he was that solid backbone you have on your team. So even though he doesn't like very obviously carry the game like Flame or anything, he's that guy you want in your corner when things are going well or things are going even.
Yeah,
Well, I remember they talked about him as like the big brother of the team, and in a similar role to Looper on or not Looper on Samsung, on Samsung White, and he's just that guy who was always so solid. And
Yeah, exactly. I think he'll be able to do that at the North American LCS too, because I mean,
yeah, definitely.
he was playing like Shy, Flame, like all these amazing players, and he's still like, yeah, I'll sit here and go toe to toe with you guys, and I'll hold my, Looper, like, oh yeah, I'll do okay. you know, and now he's going to go play. I mean, what, Dyrus Balls?
Yeah.
Nobody else really is of
Yeah, and
huge note in the top lane. I mean, Quas is okay.
the thing to note too is that like the fact that he goes toe to toe with these hard carry top laners and usually comes out of lane even, and like even if he's slightly behind, he usually makes up that impact in team fights is going to be huge because like I think that Dyrus plays relatively passively, like is not necessarily the most super aggressive player, but
Yeah.
definitely like surviving lane
Maybe
against
Zion.
Balls, against Zion, Spartan, against Quas is going to be important. Quas also not super aggressive, but it's definitely like if we start to shift in that AP caster top lane meta, like Hermit was mentioning earlier, where there is a Victor, where there are Annies, and like there are these champions that can all in you, with the help of a jungler. It's important to be able to go even in lane at least. And I think that I don't know if it does transition like that into the top lane. I don't know if those champions are in Impact's favor. I think he definitely has benefited heavily from being that kind of tanky top lane and being able to just show up to
Yeah.
team fights and having impact. But at the same time, he has experience. So, and I think that's going to play in huge here. And if he can play that big brother role and be that backbone for the team, it'll be pretty important because this is a wide range of players being brought onto the same roster, and like Zhao's English is getting steadily better. We've seen him like in interviews speaking better and better, but I know for a fact I don't think WizFusion speaks any language other than English, and it's important for him to be able to communicate with his team, so it's good that he has another English speaking support player. But there's like this roster has the potential to either be potential. I hate using that word, but it does, like, from what we know of the players on the roster, they all do some things very well. So if they can figure out how to make that work as a team, they'll do pretty well in NA. There's a lot of talent there, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so our other NA roster is going to be Winter Fox, formerly EG. EG gets rebranded. Oh, also, Alliance got rebranded to Elements, but nothing really changed there, so we won't talk about that too much. And the logo's horrible, so you guys can go look at that. Winter Fox, on the other hand, is a pretty sweet logo, although there is some arguments about whether or not the name is good. The Game of Thrones Metal Gear Solid mashup for logo names. Anyway,
As long as their tag is WTF, I'm cool.
That would be awesome, actually.
yeah, that would be pretty good.
It's probably just gonna be WF though.
probably just
Yeah.
Yeah.
WNF, like something awkward. I can see Riot doing something awkward. Anyway, so what I see for the roster is I know that they have a pretty fat roster because they have a lot of substitutes. But right now, I believe Avalon is going to be in the top lane, Helios in the jungle, Pobelter still in the mid lane, Altec as AD carry, and Imagine as support. So this is a heavily Korean roster. And then I know Glebe Glarbu is on for sub as support. We have Executioner Ken and Shorter Ace also on the team as supports or subs.
Well,
so I'm not sure how many of those players are going to see play.
Well, it's just because if you look at this roster, like, Avalon is Helios' brother. He's Helios' younger brother.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then this Imagine guy, nobody knows anything about him. I've never heard about this guy, ever. So it's just kind of like...
His name used to be Ignar. I think.
Dude, okay. But,
Pretty sure. Pretty sure.
Okay, well, at least Imagine is better than Ignar, so he did that right. But I really don't know, like, I don't know what else to say about these guys. Like, I mean, maybe they'll impress us, but I just think it's a huge... I don't understand why you would go and bet on unknown Korean players. Like, why not just bet on unknown North American players? At least they speak English, and at least the communication won't be a problem. Like, why are you bringing... Like, that just doesn't make sense.
They already bet on Helios once, so they have...
But Helios is not unknown, and he kind of worked out.
Well, and
Now
now
they're taking these
3/5
two-
of their roster speaks Korean, so I think the argument is why pick up
That's
anyone
different,
who speaks
yeah.
English.
Actually, I think
I said that-
I actually think their entire roster speaks Korean. Don't Pobelter and Altec both speak Korean?
I don't know if Altec
Pobelter
does.
definitely does.
See, this is the difference between Fnatic and Winter Fox. Like, yeah, I said like I don't like the precedent of just bring Koreans over to fix their team's problems or fill in the missing holes because that's not what they're for. But in this case, I don't know if Altec speaks Korean, but even if he doesn't, that's 4/5 of your team. That's 80% of your team speaking Korean. And the EG's Winter Fox has been in Korea for like the last month and a half or something. I think they might have been practicing with this roster for quite some time. I think it's a little different than the Fnatic situation.
Yeah.
To be fair, we don't know exactly how long they've been practicing or if they've spent a lot of that time putting this roster together and
Yeah,
like
I have no
recruiting and
idea.
trying out players. But I mean, they have spent the time in Korea, so you can hope that Alltech and Pobelter both have gotten more of an experience with Korean players and at least more experience with Helios. And you can be pretty sure that um, Avalon has been a part of the team for a while since he's Helios's brother. Imagine is a big question because like like you said before, we don't really know much about him at all.
All we know is that when he was Ignar, he was the highest ranked support in Korea.
Okay.
But I don't
and
think
I know
he's
that
Ignar. I think okay. So here's the thing.
You're talking about Imagine. Right?
I'm looking at admittedly. So let's all praise Esportspedia and hope that they're omnipotent in their knowledge. But Ignar is a different person, has a different name than Imagine. Ignar is currently listed as a sub on the roster. Imagine is listed as the starting support.
Oh.
Interesting.
So I think bottom line, lots of questions when it comes to this. Not really clear exactly what to expect from them, because we can't even figure out who their actual support player is or where he comes from. So
Yeah, as far as I could tell, he had nothing. He was just an unknown quantity, and that's a little bit scary.
Honestly, this entire team is an unknown quantity. Other than
Well,
Pobelter.
Alltech proved he was like getting good at the end of last split. Like I think like he was actually starting to play pretty well.
Yeah, but he's playing with a different support this time. It's way different than a solo
Yeah.
owner.
Yeah, that's true. Which is why I wish they had been able to find a good support because I think Alltech would be a good talent if you can like really nurture that. But we have to see how good these guys are if they can actually compete. I'm scared this will be the last place team, and if they're last place, they get relegated.
yeah, and I think the other thing to consider is that not that Alltech can't learn in this situation. It's just that it's not really going to happen from his support if there is that language barrier.
Yeah.
It's going to have to come from the coaching staff, which I think is a lot harder. When you can get advice from someone you're literally in game with, 8 or 10 hours out of the day, then it's a lot easier to learn and to grow. And I think Alltech has shown in the past that he can do that. But I just feel bad for the support staff of this team. This sounds like, as someone who doesn't speak Korean, this would be like the worst team ever to coach. But they have, they've brought on Paragon as head coach, and a player with a little bit more experience. Not so much experience in the coaching role, but definitely I'm excited to see exactly what happens here, and I'm curious exactly how it's going to work out for them.
This team might just fully function in Korean. Like if Alltech speaks Korean, I could see that them just functioning in Korean.
Yeah.
That would
I
make
have a lot
sense
of
then.
hope. I
Yeah,
have
it
a
would
lot
be
of hope
very
for them.
interesting.
I'm excited. I'm excited to see exactly what happens with Winter Fox. I like their logo. I like their name. It's a little weird for an esports organization to name their team Winter Fox, but I like it. I don't know how everyone else feels.
I don't understand
I'm
how
cool
they
with
came
it.
up with that name. I don't understand how they came up with that name, but I mean, if you think about it, we've had worse and crazier names in esports.
Exactly. Why are we complaining about Winter Fox when we've got
not.
elements?
Like I said,
Gravity, like-
GG.
like I said, just make the tag WTF, and I'm cool with it.
All right. It won't be that. I know it won't be that.
I know it
But
won't
one-
be that
but
either.
One
But
can
that's
hope,
why I want
right?
it to be. Yeah, exactly.
All right, so our single piece of Chinese roster news this week is going to be Name leaving EDG, and the rumor is that he's joining Starhorn Royal Club. So this is a pretty huge change, really big, I would say. We've seen so many changes in China in general. Name was one of the staples as far as Chinese marksmen, Chinese AD carries go. How do we feel about Name leaving the team?
If this lane happened, it's arguably top 3. You're uniting one of the most creative, independent ADCs with a support who has made his name in getting the best out of whatever. Well, Uzi I, who
It's Uzi. Yeah, it's Uzi I.
he does whatever he wants, and so I think that this would be a really amazing lane if we were to see it. I think that they would be interesting to watch at all points in the game, and I would be really excited if this was going to happen.
But they're so different stylistically. Like if you look at Uzi versus Name, like Name's so much more like safe and calculated. Like he's more like for the to make it like a very
that's
like
a
he's more like the
that's
Korean.
kind of a yeah. It's true. He is more. He's definitely more of a def style AD carry,
Yeah.
or as Loco Doco once put it, a fire, an ice AD carry versus a fire AD carry. A fire AD carry being someone like Wild Turtle, or Uzi.
Yeah.
He's definitely more of an ice. But I will say this, and it's something that a lot of the Western audience hasn't seen, is that he is very good still at playing those aggressive carries well. One thing he
course.
was really famous for when Twitch was popular and Twitch was good was he would just go in with an Orianna ball and initiate the fight himself. He knows how to play the AD carry role aggressively as well as defensively.
Which is, and I think the big thing to consider is that if he is going to be put onto any new team, like this is a great team for him to go on because, like you said, the current support is just this can work with anybody. Like that's the strength, right? And the issue I see is for Starhorn as a whole. You know what I mean? Like Uzi commanded so much attention on the team. Not that the team always needed to play to him, and not that he always was the hyper carry, but he did. Like that's how they played their team for so long. I'm wondering how they're going to be able to adapt because I'm almost 100% positive the bot lane would be phenomenal, but will the team as a whole be able to shift? Not that Name can't play that hyper aggressive style like you're saying. Like it's not something we've seen a whole lot from him, but it is definitely he has the potential to do so.
Yeah.
It's just that like, is that transition going to go smoothly? Like, is this team going to work well together? So the question for me is more to do with like team relationship and team willing to change.
Dynamic.
Yeah, team dynamic as opposed to like individual skill or even bot lane in any regard.
Well, the particular question is Insec, because Insec was the one who always was talked about as sharing that same kind of aggressive soul as Uzi. And so I think less so Corn and Cole, Zero was just there to protect Uzi, but Insec always shared that soul. And they played very much the same way. If I've got a 20% chance I'm going to win this, if I play it perfectly and everybody does their thing, I'm going in. And Insec was right there with them, as his dive buddy. And so that's where I have the question is how does Insec transition to working with an AD carry who's going to definitely be more kind of reserved, calculating, held back. And before, he hasn't necessarily had so much success. When he was on Bullets, for example, with Score.
Yeah, that's true. I just want to see if Name keeps the mantle. Because, I mean, you can easily argue, I think there was debates for other players, but I think the argument could be won by saying that Name was the best player in China over the course of last year, right? I don't think our LPL friends will shoot us for that.
Yes, there's an argument for that.
Yeah, so I think like the key is like can he do that again? Because if he can do that again, I mean Uzi played magnificent in Worlds, but that wasn't him. You couldn't make that case that Uzi was the best player in China last season during the season.
Yeah, no, you couldn't.
Nowhere near as easily, at least, right? Or as rationally. So if you're now you can make it for Name. Can he do that again? And if so, that's. I mean, you'd think that would have to, if he can do that again, if he can be considered one of the best players in China, you think that Starhorn could ride on the back of that.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think Corn and Cole are on the upswing. You have to realize that when they went to Worlds, they had only been in one split of the LPL.
Yeah, they were new players, right?
And so they're learning and growing too. And I think that they showed a whole lot of development over the time that they were in Starhorn, and as long as they continue to develop with and that's the whole question of this past off season. Actually, you said about Name's kind of return to form versus where he was at Worlds, and I think Corn and Cola will continue to get better, but yes, that's the question: will Name return to form? And if he does, he's got a great supporting cast around him, except for that one question of Insec.
Right.
Agreed. So in our final piece of roster news tonight, we're going to take a trip to BR. Of course, this is a region that none of us particularly follow too well, so I'm just going to kind of go through it. The two announcements we've seen is BRTT rejoins Pain Gaming. BRTT obviously has quite a history with the team as a whole, and with obviously the two Korean players leaving, Pain needed to find a replacement. The other one, this one is completely, the first one is confirmed, but the second one is more of a rumor, as I think it's Diode. I don't know how to pronounce his name.
Yeah, dude. Diode, whatever.
Diode. Formerly of EU, is rumored, and like once again, this is not 100% confirmed. It's been said that he's been seen with the team, and I imagine that if you are in BR as an EU player, you're pretty much confirmed to be on a BR team. So we'll talk about that one a little bit. How do we feel about him as a player? How do we feel about him moving to a new region? Is this, in general, is he the kind of player that we can see moving on to a new team and doing well?
Well, I've never been terribly impressed by him. Not to say that he's a bad player or anything, but he's never been one that's like stricken me with performances where I was like, wow, this guy is a guy to keep your eye on. Mm-hmm. But admittedly, I haven't watched too much European Challenger, so.
He's a journeyman support. That's how I kind of view him. You know, he's gonna show up and he's gonna show up and do his job at whatever, you know, wherever he is, and he's gonna do a pretty all right job. But he's not gonna show up and be somebody that's, you know, giving a top 3 region performance. Right. And maybe my Brazil knowledge is not so good, but isn't BRT kind of a veteran in the scene?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he has a lot longer history within the scene for sure.
So maybe
slightly negative, slightly positive.
Maybe pairing him with Diode with BRTT will kind of form some kind of young old relationship that propels both of them to a higher level. Maybe
it could be an experiment, but
I think it's a ton of speculation, and I think since none of us are really qualified to talk about Pain Gaming and Pain style in general, outside of the fact that I love Kami, anything to help Kami is good news to me. But you know, once again, I think we'll have Emily Rand on in the future, especially with CB Law coming up, and she'll be able to talk to us about this new Pain Gaming team dynamic. But as we're not all quite so qualified, we'll have to stick to that general speculation that. You know, he's probably not going to be the best, but there's always maybe, like you said, that young old relationship, that new dynamic might encourage him to step up his game, and he'll find and just rediscover his love for League of Legends and some romantic VR fantasy. I don't know. It's all pretty far fetched to me. I think he'll be okay, but we'll see exactly what happens. Back to things we do know, for sure. LCS changes. This one is going to be huge. I'm going to give a brief run through of it before we get started, and I know everybody has an opinion. So first off, with 10 teams now, the top finishing teams are going to get points. Those points go towards qualifying for Worlds. In the spring split, the first place gets 90 points. And the point values are only valuable, once again, for qualifying for Worlds. And then as you move into the summer split, the first place team in summer split is guaranteed to qualify. And then any additional qualifications. So the second place is going to be based on points. And I believe the third place, there is a small tournament to play for that third place spot. And then, of course, the last bit is that the 10th place or the 10th seed in any split is automatically relegated, and the first place challenger seed moves up immediately. There is no tournament for that. The remaining teams qualify and play as normal, but the 10th place team is immediately relegated. So pretty huge, pretty sweeping changes. I know this is a lot of it is what we've asked for. You know, this is Riot trying to find more value in the spring split, but how do you guys feel about it?
I kind of like that they're giving more weight to spring split, because you know, like in previous years, a lot of teams just played to not lose and just stay in spring because it didn't really matter, because like spring didn't matter when it came to Worlds qualifications unless you dropped out of LCS in spring. So it's kind of nice that they're giving more weight to the first split. I don't know if that'll actually motivate the teams more to try harder or work even harder than they were, but I do like the change.
Well, yeah, because now you can, you can qualify with a first and a third place basically, unless another team comes second in both splits. If you come first in the spring split, you just basically have to get third in the summer split, and you're at Worlds, unless somebody comes second both splits.
I'm a huge fan of most of these changes. Personally, I don't like the randomness of a best of one, and I would have liked to
No
see.
one likes the best of one.
Yeah, me neither. I don't like the
I
best.
would
of
have liked to
ones.
see best of twos, but I think that the trade-off having a shorter season of only 18 games is a fair trade-off.
Yeah.
Shorter season too, only 9 weeks is pretty good. And
No super week
I
either.
like. Yeah, no super weeks. I don't like super weeks, and I don't think many people do, or many players or coaches or analysts do.
Or anyone,
Or even-
especially
even-
people who
even
go on
fans, 'cause,
talk
like, if-
shows and have to talk about 15 games.
Well, if you're doing stuff too, like even if you're just a casual fan, like that's a lot of time that you have to dedicate to
Yeah.
watching this. Like think about that. That's like 4 days of just like nothing but league. Like not many people have time to watch that many games, right? Like that's just the bare reality of it. Not in that.
Well, I
kind
mean,
of
it's less that. It's more the fact that like LCS teams get 4 days to prepare for a week, but like in Super Week you get like 2 days to prepare.
Yeah,
And that's not
exactly.
including
Yes.
travel time, rest from the previous week, and it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And the
No,
kind of
but-
I think it just, and especially like that is also magnified by the fact that they're all best of ones. So it's just like
Yeah,
totally like a strategy in best of ones is so
strange.
you can say strength. It's just poor a lot of the times. A lot of times people come in with like really underdeveloped strategies and they get away with it in a best of one format and they continue to use it. And then like on those super weeks, it's just too much. I think it's too much, and there's just too little value in a best of one series to play that many games in a week. So it's just I'm glad that they're gone. I agree that I'm sad that there's no best of two. I think we were all hoping for best of two OGN style.
Because I mean,
Yeah.
also adaptation is really important because, I mean, if you, I don't know how else to stress the importance of adapting in a series. It's just if you don't adapt well, you lose in a series, and then you know what
Yeah.
matters more, best of threes, best of fives. That's where you place in like the regional tournaments where you go to worlds, and if you don't know how to adapt well because you just got there from being good at best of ones, you're gonna like flop when it comes to like the first playoff match, the first bracket match.
And I mean, to a certain degree, I understand why Riot does best of ones. It's definitely for spectators who are more casual about viewing. It makes sure that everybody, if you are a fan of any team in NA, there is always a reason to watch LCS, right?
That's
Like
true.
whereas OGN, like
Yeah.
if you're only a fan of one team in OGN, chances are you're watching like 1 day a week, right? And then they want people to watch both days of LCS. It will help their viewership numbers, but I think it does cut down on competitive quality of games, which is I think is consistently a choice we see Riot making, which is that they'll take viewer numbers over competitive quality any day of the week.
Yeah, well, it's marketing, right? I've said that a million times, but that's what it is, right? And I mean, that's even why, like, you'll notice that with the storylines, like, Thor put out this video, the Faker Fallacy video. I'm not sure if you guys saw it, but where he basically talks about how they basically say players can always get better. Like, a player can always improve his level, but, like, very rarely does he, like, actually get worse, right? Like,
Yeah.
and that's also, like, I'm not sure if it's conscious, but I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if it is. Because in a way, like, what are they selling with that? Like, oh, if you keep playing the game, you can get better, and you can be diamond, and you can be a pro, and you know what I mean? Like, and the reality is, if you've been playing the game for 3 years and you're in bronze, you're probably not getting out of bronze. I mean, realistically, right? Like,
I think well, let's not cut the dreams of every bronzy. I mean, you can get better, but it's not going to be by leaps and bounds, and it's not
Yeah.
going to be because at a certain point, I think you do reach your like mechanical skill ceiling, or you reach your mental capacity as to how many things you can keep track of in a game.
Yeah.
And once you hit that point, specifically how many things you can keep track of, I think is really where players are going to start to fumble and falter. Like if you, because there's a lot of things constantly happening in a game of League of Legends. Like a lot of resources you have to constantly be aware of. You have to be aware of like your power spikes, your enemy power spikes, waves, how waves are pushing wards, and I think a lot of that is alleviated because you have 5 people on your team. But at the same time, like being aware of that is always going to make you a better player. And I think that for most pro players, they're about, especially in pro players who've had more experience, they've hit their mechanical skill ceiling, and it's just a matter of like, can they learn to play their role better, as opposed
Yeah.
to being better at
Yeah.
mechanics.
yeah,
I think-
exactly.
I want to talk about the two changes I really like a lot, which are the gauntlet for qualification at the end of everything, and the tournaments at the end of each split. I think it's really smart to replace the tournament, the end of split or to replace the Super Weeks with the end of split tournament. I think most people prefer to watch a bracket style versus just a regular kind of round robin, and I think it's just interesting. Plus, all of those bracket matches are in best of 5, which most intelligent people think is the best format for League of Legends because, as Steve mentioned before, the adaptation factor. And so that's really exciting to me to have a set best of 5 bracket stage at the end of every playoff to look forward to. And then the Gauntlet, that had a great success in. Sorry, go ahead.
So for those of you who don't know, the Gauntlet we're turning to, it's the same thing as the OGN regional qualifiers. It's kind of referred to often as a King of the Hill format. It's going to be fourth, or your lowest seed plays the next lowest seed, and then the winner of that goes on to play. So if it's fourth place will play third place. The winner of that will go on to play second place. The winner of that will go on to play first place, and then the winner of the whole thing qualifies for Worlds, I believe, and that's how we determine our third seed for Worlds. And so I love the format, but you were going to explain it or talk about it a little bit first.
I was just going to say I think it created some really awesome storylines for Worlds that gave Najin this kind of special narrative in terms of triumphing over both CJ and SKT and the rising KT Arrows. And I think that I'm excited for that qualification format to affect next year's Worlds and see kind of what kind of storylines we can get out of it.
Especially when you consider. I'm sorry, go on.
I was gonna say teams like Cloud9, especially, who tend to suffer in best of ones. Like, can you imagine Cloud9 being like 4th or 5th seed at the start of this tournament? Because they're gods of the best of 5. So you just get to watch them in their element systematically crush every team that might have like skimmed a few games off of them during the regular season. Yeah. So it's. As a spectator, I agree. Like, it's really exciting. I think it does promote a good narrative, and I think it definitely encourages teams who are more middle ground teams and not at the top to get better at those best of 5 situations, or those, which I think, like you said, and I agree that best of 5s are where it's at. Like, and if you want to be a good team, you can't just let yourself be comfortable doing best of 1s in this LCS format. Like, you need to prepare yourself for the most competitive form of League of Legends, which is still going to be those best of 5s, or, I mean, best of 3 maybe, but like best of 1s is definitely not it.
No.
Yep.
I was going to say
really
that.
Love the fact how sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that the narratives are definitely enhanced, especially in the regional, the Gauntlet, because if you are a team that wasn't in the spring split and then you come in the second half, you're at a severe disadvantage to the top teams in the spring split because you didn't get the points, right? But then you can still qualify for Worlds through the Gauntlet, and that does make for the better storyline. That's all I was going to add in.
Well, and you can also get first place too. Like, I mean,
that's true.
Probably unlikely. We're not going to see another like Cloud9 come in and sweep the round robin, but I agree that they did put in sufficient things that if you are qualifying via the Challenger League, then there is still like hope for you in the summer season to qualify for Worlds, which is pretty important because all of these changes in general, I think, are about forcing LCS to be more competitive and forcing those teams that are like content to get 6th place and avoid relegation, or 5th place and avoid relegation, like to step up their game, right? Because now there's a real reason to compete at every given stage. Like, even if you're not the best team in North America, there's still a reason to step it up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just love the way that they did it, right? Because before it was like the only thing that really, really mattered was A, not getting relegated, and B, finishing top 3 in the summer split. That's all that mattered, right? And then you get to go to Worlds, and that's it. Now they have it so that the best team in the summer split, so the best team right before Worlds gets to go to Worlds. That's good. The best team, the best team over the course of the year on average gets to go to Worlds. That's also good. Mm-hmm. And then the team that manages out of all the teams that remain that were ranked, above 6th place or 7th place or whatever they're doing, then the best team out of all those teams that could win and beat everybody else, they get to go to Worlds. So it's like a perfect way of figuring out, okay, this is really a true representation of this region's skill. Like the best team over the time, the best team right now, and the second best team right now, I guess. maybe barring
Yeah.
that other team that's there. And then there you go. So now it's like there's multiple opportunities. There's no more excuses. Oh, we choked in this one way. Okay, well, you can get in all these other ways now too. So it'll be good. You know, I'm excited. I really like the format for the most part. The only thing I don't really like is the automatic kicking out of the 10th team. Because I think that's kind of like what happens if there's a clear drop-off between 10 and 11. Now what? We just have an even worse team in the LCS for a year? Or first
No, doesn't
split?
the team that gets dropped out doesn't the 10th team get just automatically dropped into the challenger scene? Like, do they not get to chance to re-qualify?
Yeah, they do, but they don't get to play that split, so they're automatically out for split. Like if you come in 10th, you're automatically out for split.
Oh, you're not allowed to re-qualify for summer?
Yeah, like if you come, yeah, exactly. Because what happens is you're out, and then 9 plays 8. The 8th place team gets to pick whatever team they want from challenger out of the second.
No,
and third
I
best
get that,
challenger
but like,
teams.
I'm confused that why wouldn't 10th place be allowed to compete with the other challengers teams for the top 3 seeds to compete against
The next
7th,
split.
7, 8,
Yeah.
9.
Because then it's already set. Like basically when
It's already
when-
set
at
before.
the end of
That's kind of
yeah,
weird.
yeah. So like at the end of the challenger split is at the end of the LCS split, right? Like the end at the same time. So the 10th seed will be and the first place seed at the end of the challenger tournament. Right? 'Cause
Okay,
there's a challenger
yeah,
tournament,
I'm
right?
reading
the
over
first
again.
Place,
Okay.
Yeah.
I just
So that's
assumed it
basically
would be
what
the other
happens.
way around. It just seems that just sounds weird.
And
Yeah, no, I agree with you, but it's like that's the only part of this I don't like is I don't like the fact that there could be because there has been before a significant drop off between LCS and non-LCS, and we've seen that with no teams have managed to squeak through the relegation tournament.
Well,
It's just been the same teams.
and that's going to be an ongoing concern, especially now that we've expanded to 10 teams.
Yeah,
too.
exactly.
So, like, is there enough talent in NA to support a 10-team LCS? And then also, is there enough to support a challenger scene as well that like has hopes of getting into the LCS? I mean, I know a lot of the challenger teams in NA this season, and I'm excited to see some of them play. But you know, are they good enough to be an LCS? I'm not sure. And I think that you're right. Like, we're automatically going to get one of them, and it's probably going to be Fusion next. But
Yeah, probably.
It just seems
That's
weird
what-
because like that's how it works in Japan. Like Japan has a much smaller league. I mean, they don't have many teams. So like you had 4 teams in a split, and then the 4th place team there wasn't a playoff. There was just you get ranked at by your score and through the round robin, and then 4th team drops out, and then but they still get the chance to requalify for the next split. I just assumed that's how it was gonna work. It doesn't make any sense to do it otherwise.
yeah, I think we can agree in general that this is definitely a step in the right direction, though. Like,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah,
leaps
it's
and
true.
bounds better than it was before. It is definitely less than perfect. It's not exactly where we want it to be. But it's
yeah, no,
definitely
it can
better.
improve a bit more, but it's a lot better. So kudos to Riot for that.
Yeah, definitely. They did it. They made something better. Spring
Well-
split finally matters.
Please,
Yeah.
please bring us best of 2s though.
Yeah, best of 2s and no automatic relegation, and then we're talking.
Well, hold on. If you
I
had to
would-
choose one of them, I'm going for best of 2s. Sorry,
I
10th
would
place
vote for
team.
best of twos.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
I
10th
would
place
too,
team.
'cause
Best of 2s are more important than you.
Yeah, that's true. Because no one really gives a crap about the 10th
Yeah.
place team anyway. Let's be honest.
Place, if you're the 10th place team after all those best of twos, then you clearly deserve to be in 10th place. It's not like it happened on accident, you know? It's not like you got cheesed out by the best of one format. There's really no argument. I mean, not that the next 10th place team doesn't equally
Think about the
deserve-
complexity. How many people they turtle shelled? It was like the opposite. They almost weren't. Their record wasn't as bad as it should have been because they just would like come out and just win these games. Everyone was like, "What?"
Because
That happened.
but complexity
That
is
happened
like
to best of 2 or best of 3.
The
The other
num-
team would be like, "Okay, let's go."
the number one example for why it shouldn't be best of ones. I feel like
Exactly.
is complex.
They're
It's just
It's like poetic how great of an example they are for that.
like you want to know why picks like Jungle TF exist. You know what I mean? Not that the Unicorns of Love didn't earn their series against TSM, but it's because of stuff like best of one, where you can be like, oh, we have this one champion that no one's going to know how to deal with for exactly one game because his glaring weaknesses aren't super obvious. So we're just going to play him because there's literally no downside. And yeah, all right, best of ones suck. I hate them, but hopefully we'll see that change in the future. I'm skeptical, but onto a region with a better format. Korea started. Its horrible name or new acronym is LCK or LIC, as many of us enthusiastically refer to it. Formerly OGN, LIC Week 1. Let's talk a little bit about these games. I mean, okay, so, or just how about the teams in general, since the games kind of varied in quality. But right off the bat, do we think that the standings are still from the preseason are still reflected now? Do we still feel like SKT is the best team? Do we still feel like Najin is the second? I believe Huya ended up getting third in the preseason, although I'm not like that one was a little sketchy. So how do we feel about the top two teams specifically? How do we feel about SKT and Najin at this point?
SKT showed up with two different teams. It seemed like their series against Najin,
Yeah,
even in that Najin series, their first game was like I don't know, and then the second two games, like games 2 and 3, you're like, oh okay, that's better SKT, good job.
Mhm.
And then against CJ, they just didn't even show up. Like they literally just got stomped. He was just like, oh okay, I thought you guys were supposed to be really good and CJ was supposed to suck. Like what happened here? And then as for Najin, I mean, they played pretty well. I feel like they kind of broke down in that SKT series. Like that game 3 from them especially, they just looked like super sad. Like they just were like, it just wasn't the same team that they were in game 1. But they did very well their second set. So I don't know. I mean, it's weird that they're both 1-1. I think they'll be up higher. Huya looked really strong though. They 2-0'd IM. It was. They played really good. So I don't know. I think that top 3 will hold. I think it might take a few weeks based on who the teams are playing and stuff for them to kind of even out. CJ looked better than they did in the preseason, though, must be said.
Yeah. Before we move on to CJ, because I know like CJ actually surprised pretty much everybody this week. I want to linger on SKT for just a second. Let's talk SKT pick ban phase. It's been pretty bad. Like, not very good. We see a lot of early mid lane picks. The emphasis on Xerath specifically, like, I understand why that would be. If you're going to early pick a mid laner, that's a pretty solid one to do. If you're not going to pick a flex pick like Lysandra or Kassadin, just because obviously he has like one of the most absurdly safe laning phases in the game. But at the same time, this is really odd. Like, this emphasis on this pickup obviously did a little bit better for EasyHoon than it did for Faker. But still really weird. Hermit, Steven, Dave, do you guys have any insight as to why this is happening? Do you think this is a strategy they're trying and is just failing, or is this what is this? Like, what is this first picking mid lane consistently thing?
I honestly don't know. I mean, it feels so weird because like they did it with Faker, and then they switched to EasyHoon and then went back to Faker. But like most of they just kept first picking their mid laner. It just felt so out of place, and I don't know if they're just trying to throw them out and like throw them out over the cliff and see how they do or anything, like, because it's the beginning of the season. But it just felt weird. Like I can't think of why they would.
Well, so here's my kind of view of the meta right now. I pretty much feel like it's the league of pick comps, in that essentially you have people just picking pick comps unless they get something like Corki Jace or Janna or some other kind of like power pick that kind of like doesn't need a particular style. But in the East, in particular, you see a lot more of this comp that SK ran in game 1 versus CJ, which is like this. It's hard to explain, but it's kind of a run at you comp. Like any kind of 3 members or kind of combination of members are able to take down, fight in these kind of 3v3 skirmishes, and they're really good at these 3v3 skirmishes. And the idea is that if somebody's out of position, you can close on them really fast. A lot of people have engage tools, and you back this up with a really global, not a semi-global mid laner like Xerath, or a guy who roams really well like Zed, or and the comp works because if you have better vision control and you're able to catch people out, you can people. And you're just like, it's kind of like, I'm going to use a Magic analogy, but it's kind of like how mid-range always beats up on aggro. Like you just have bigger dudes, and you come to the fight with bigger dudes. Then they're you beat the pick comp because your guys are a little bit more tanky. You can fight kind of the same way, but you don't necessarily, you don't have as much burst.
And I will And I will say this:
Go ahead.
the Sivir pick that I think if people are looking to define run at you comps, it's usually the Sivir AD carry that is kind of the pivotal point of it. And I think that one of the reasons I think Sivir is seeing a resurgence is because of those team comps, like you mentioned. And I
Yeah.
think that the big thing about Sivir in that huge movement speed utility that she gives is that she lets you redefine overextending because against a normal team, obviously with a certain degree of vision control, you're able to stay safe for the most part. But when you're playing against Sivir, that degree changes because she is so fast and because she can make an entire
Yeah.
team so fast. Suddenly, what was once, not overextending, now that Sivir's popped alt, you have, in some cases, a Gnar, an Annie, a Xerath. You have someone on top of you almost immediately, a Lee Sin, and instantly you are able it feels like a more efficient not maybe a more efficient form of a pick comp because you don't rely purely on vision control and purely on people being out of position. It's more like you are always able to force those team fights on your terms, those small skirmishes, because you have
Yeah.
that mobility. And so as a
Exactly.
result, like you can get advantages like that. So I can see what you're saying as far as Xerath being a powerful early pick if you know you're going to build a team around that. But at the same time, you do need better vision control to play a team like that, and you also need to have still need to have better map movement. And it's not really what we saw.
Yeah, and Monty and Doa made a particular point actually during Champion Select in Game 1 of talking about how Monty in particular felt like SKT had this great comp that was just going to kind of run up on CJ. Annie was going to burst him down. Gnar was going to combo in. They had Sivir for the movement speed, Xerath for the backline, and Lee Sin kind of for the middle ground. And I didn't agree with that. And the reason why I didn't agree with that is because I felt like CJ had three of the most powerful picks in the meta right now between Corki, Jarvan, and Jace. Not a lot of Western teams have really picked up that much Jace, but I think he's really, really strong right now, especially when you pair him with somebody like Corki. You have all of the poke in the universe, and I just felt like CJ was going to be able to outlast SK in Game 1.
Well, the thing to consider is that like no matter SKT as a whole is running this very vulnerable comp, and they rely on getting in and starting these fights. But like, even if you get that idea, if a fight starts in your ideal scenario where like Annie, Gnar, Xerath, like Lee Sin, you get all this CC off immediately, like you're not going to kill the Mundo, the J4, and the Braum with all that CC. And if you blow all of those cooldowns, you're still going to die to the Jace and the Corki. So it's just like there isn't enough damage to fight a full 5v5 team fight. So you do have to look for those skirmishes. And like any time you don't get the engage that you want, and anytime Braum and or J4 can disengage or at least ruin your engage in some way, or slightly limit your engage, those team fights are instantly going to go south. And that's pretty much exactly what we saw happen. Was like, we're gonna speed in there and try to force this, and like it never worked the way they wanted it to.
Well, there was a team fight at like 28 minutes, I think, in Game 1 where SK got their combo off. They had Gnar teleport in. They had Sivir ult in, and they were able to pull off a pick on Jace, and they tried to transition that into a Baron, but were unsuccessful in doing so. So you're exactly correct. If the comp works, it can succeed, but it just was too difficult for SK to really put all the pieces together enough times against CJ in Game 1.
Definitely. So with SKT looking, so CJ played phenomenally, I guess is what I was about to say. CJ played very well. We were talking about this before the show started, I know. And
they played good, but I think it was also a lot of like SKT didn't play the same way that they played against Legend.
Exactly.
I think it was a combination of both things. Like I don't think it's like, CJ is now the best team in the league. Like it was one best of 3 series. And I think that they could be 4th or 5th though, based if they play like that every week.
And that's my question. Yeah, like where do we see CJ now? Because obviously this is better than CJ did in the preseason. At the same time, I think obviously SKT1's strategy was a little bit flawed and did not maybe just didn't take CJ as seriously as they should have. I know. Well, let's talk about the team as a whole. I think is Space good now, or did he just step it up in those series? That's my big question.
I think it's a mix of Space stepping up and the other good Korean players not being in Korea anymore.
Well, yeah, that in like 2 games is too small of a sample size too, right? Like we
Yeah.
really can't. Like I don't want to draw any conclusions off only like 2 games. He looked all right. I mean, he played decent. There's no doubt about that. Was this just like a one-off for him, and is he going to go back to playing poorly, or will he step up and actually start to become a pretty good? I mean, that's we need to see more games.
I mean, when you look at the last 2 years in the LCS, doesn't Link usually start off strong and then choke at the end? I mean, yeah, like
Yeah.
Dave said, this is not any indicator of anything. The first week is now no indicator of jack shit.
Yeah, it's a good start. I mean, it's not.
Yeah, it's a good
stepping
start,
stone on which to build some confidence. That's about it.
A good
right?
start
Like,
is better than
yeah,
a shit start. So,
for
That's,
sure.
that's
Yeah.
a much
I mean,
more...
I thought
Go ahead.
I thought Ambition was a real man in this series. Like he had
Oh, he
100%
was.
kill participation in game 2. Like
Yeah,
was-
he went full man mode.
it was beastly, and I'm an Ambition hater all the way, man. But
Yeah, his Jarvan was
Like-
really good.
He's not feeding
Yeah, it was-
anymore.
it was
This is
fine.
weird. Like this
he's
is
not
the
giving first
Ambition-
blood every game?
yeah,
Hey, it's
I just feel like as someone who comes from the era of Ambition being bad and like being one of the
Yeah.
problems with CJ, it's like it's hard for me to get behind. But I think you're right. Like
Mhm.
I remember people like being like, Ambition got first blood on Kazakhs. This is crazy. Ambition's good now. I'm like, no, never. It's never gonna happen. Like,
It
I
was
don't
kind of
care.
funny though. I don't remember which game, but I think he gave the second blood, and in my head I'm like, that's close enough, right?
I just like it's if it comes down to it, it's never for me. It's never going to be Ambition doing something well. It's always going to be someone else doing something poorly. Just because I despise him so vehemently that like if
well,
he has,
he has more MVP points than Faker.
all right. Week one. Just
he's good,
please
right?
forget week one. It's week one. You're right. You're all right. That's the most level-headed response at anyone, and now I'm the one trying to stir the pot and trying to talk smack.
You're just so used to the Ambition hate train.
I hate him so much. I miss you, Flame. Come back.
We all miss Flame.
I blame him for everything. Everyone leaving Korea. And they're
You
like,
broke this family apart.
We can't
and you
play
got
in
to
a
keep the
league with
house.
Ambition.
Oh my god.
So I'll say something else about that series is that in game 2, SKT had another one of these kind of run at you comps, but it was a bit more kind of late game focused, and less. I mean, the Sivir got picked away, and SK actually first rotation Tristana, but I think that the Lulu pick was huge here and basically won CJ the game because Maokai got item baited into not having any armor, and then Sivir, Ezreal, Jarvan just like pretty much ripped him to shreds. There was a fight around Dragon at one point in time when he had Banshee's cowl and Respector's cowl, and like just he was all MR focused, and if he had lived for a half second longer, his ult probably could have prevented a lot of damage and kept the rest of his team alive. And it was just a really, really close margin where who knows what kind of difference the right prioritization of defensive stats would have helped out there. And so I think that Lulu pick was really key for CJ in terms of securing this game.
And Lulu, of course, as a lane bully, forces that kind of itemization too. So he was
Yeah,
in a
yeah,
situation
exactly.
where he had to choose between dying in lane or putting himself behind in items, or staying even in items but having them be the wrong items. And I think it's good on CJ to force decisions like that, right? Because the choice is build MR and keep up and be able to trade in lane, or build armor and be relevant in team fights but be an item behind for the rest of the game.
Another thing to consider is that CJ picked, so they second rotation their bot lane, which was Sivir Thresh, and they already knew that they were against a Tristana. So when SKT picked the Maokai and the Annie, CJ knew all their lanes, so it was Maokai top and Annie Trist bot. Sivir Thresh does okay versus Annie Trist, but like Maokai is just going to get zoned, like completely zoned by a Sivir Thresh, and whereas Lulu versus Tristana Annie can actually do a little bit of some things, and so SKT they couldn't lane swap, and as you said, they were subject to the lose situation at that point.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
it feels to me like this is SK Telecom not respecting CJ.
Yeah.
And pick and ban
Yeah.
phase like 100%, because I mean consistently we see this horrible flaw in their pick ban phase. Like they're so they tunnel onto these strategies, and they don't. And this is probably just week one weaknesses. Like they're gonna have
Yeah.
more respect as they move forward. But they dominated preseason so hard, it doesn't surprise me that they came in with less than. I mean, especially CJ, who looked so weak in the preseason. I can
Yeah.
understand why they would underestimate them. But, I mean, obviously, CJ, you can't underestimate them. They're still not the best team, but they performed pretty phenomenally, and they played pick ban really smart. And, I mean, I love good pick ban, and this was, without a doubt, just a great pick ban phase. I think you're right. The Ezreal mid pick was just, like, definitely isn't the strongest mid pick, and it was definitely not an example of, like, an aggressive pick ban phase in any way, shape, or form, but, like, an excellent defensive pick. But like you said, the Lulu was phenomenal and just did work that game. Just not even.
SKT was also focusing on the Annie a lot for some reason. Maybe it's because Najin played it against
Yeah.
them and they thought it was good or something. But I mean, Wolf didn't exactly play well with it, so I didn't understand it personally.
I think that might be Wolf's weakness, though, not necessarily the team strategy. Because I do think Annie's good right now. Like I do think that there is an argument to be made for Annie being relevant.
Yeah, no, that's fine. But if you know your support can't play it, then like,
Yeah.
or if you know what I mean,
Exactly.
then
Yeah.
it's not good.
When I
So,
describe a
Wolf
perfect
looked really
pick,
off his game.
Yeah.
when you like think about good picks and champion select, the first thing you have to consider is can the person who's going to end up with that pick play it? Like that's the most important question. And I don't think it was one that they really considered. Or maybe maybe he did have excellent performance with scrims on it, but I think you're right that whatever happened, Wolf just didn't show up, and that was a huge problem for the team as a whole. The other series I want to talk about specifically is Samsung versus Jin Air. I know these are kind of underdog teams and are maybe less than exciting to you guys, but I'm a big Bliss fan.
Yeah.
And I love Samsung's solo queue all-star teams. And of course, Jin Air manages to lose just about every series they play in because their team and their decision-making is so weird. But they managed to win this one. From what I saw, the Morgana pick was like the most important part of this series. Without a doubt, Morgana looked so good. Has pretty much, by both of these teams, have used Morgana as a flex pick. Top lane, mid lane, bot lane support, like as anything. So, do you feel like this? My general question about this series is: well, one, how did you feel about the series, and two, Morgana. Like, what makes Morgana good? Why is Morgana good? Why do you think Morgana will continue to see play, or if this is just like a team specific kind of thing?
I think in this particular series, well, I like this series because you have really a lot of different things going on in each game. In game one, you had a really strong, well, not a really strong, but like this, we used to call it a death ball comp where you have like Morg, you had Lulu, you have two great targets to put them on. They didn't have like 4 shields like we saw from TSM in the playoffs last year, but I thought that was really kind of an interesting quote unquote triple AP comp versus a more kind of standard meta comp with the Jace and the Rumble. And then the other games again where there was a lot of variety in comps throughout this series, which I thought showcased the diversity of the squads and their players' champion pools. Morgana has even popped up as a top laner in some regions. I've seen her in scrims, and I think one of the big reasons she's really popular is because of that poke style that we were talking about earlier. And we saw in IM Cologne, we saw Pinoy just like basically having this Thorin caricatured it as he jumped in, bursted the 80 carry down, and then he either got bursted down or got out. And Morgana helps you keep your 80 carry alive in those kind of situations.
Well, and I also think one of the other things, like Morgana in general, does well in pick comps, which are incredibly popular right now because of that dark binding. She wave clears really well, which makes her a threat against a lot of the weaker top laners or top laners without wave clear. And if you have a Sivir and you have a Morgana. Like, no one's getting out of Soul Shackles. And quite frankly, Morgana's bases are absurd. Like, absurd, which is obviously why she's seen so much play as a support, is because she can do so much damage. But, when you put her in a lane where she does have more farm, her biggest weakness is, like, she doesn't have a way to, to, like, get in range to get those multi-person ults. But when she's TP, when she's running top lane, or if she's mid lane and you've got a Sivir on your team, or bot lane, you've got a Sivir on your team, it's much easier for her to get into the middle of the fray. And obviously, Black Shield, when you have access to items and AP, is just it scales not fantastically, but pretty darn well. And with so much of the CC that's present, most notably like Gnar and Jarvan, not being magic damage based, they don't actually do anything to that shield. So you can still survive through AP caster burst while also denying them any knockup. So yeah, I agree that it's meta dependent, but Morgana just seems absurdly powerful right now.
Yeah. She's a pretty strong pick. I think that hitbox is still ridiculous on our Q. It's so big.
It's so big. I love it. Sorry, I played a bunch of Morgana last night, and I was like, this is total bullshit. But since I'm playing Morgana, this is like the best thing on the face of the planet.
You go play Lux after, and you just feel like a total noob. You're like, oh god, this is what it's like to have a normal skill shot.
They have the same name. Why don't they do the same thing? I don't get it. Is that what the difference between the light and the dark side is? God damn.
The dark side is bigger.
I was like, it's a lie about its hitboxes. Come on.
Yeah, basically.
All right. So is there anything else? I mean, I agree. There's a lot of variety in these these team comps. We saw Syndra support, for those of you who didn't watch the games. It's actually not the best series. So if you're not a big Korea fan, I wouldn't recommend going back and watching it. But if you are interested in seeing Korea and you are interested in seeing more interesting picks in Korea, Samsung right now is a team that will pick weird stuff. They picked the first team to pick Morgana as a mid laner. They picked Syndra support, and it worked for them. They won that game with some interesting strategies, namely just ulting to get balls on the ground and then using the scatter of the week to get a multi-person stun. So
that's really cool.
It was definitely innovative. It's still weird. Still don't think it'll see play, but definitely.
Well, hey, it just did.
Definitely did work. I don't think it'll see a lot of play. Like, I don't think it'll be a.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, I agree with you. But I thought it was cool. It was like a very interesting strategy. Like, oh, we'll ult the first. It might be good if you have like a one-man initiation sort of squad on the other team, where like if you have like a Jarvan and then a bunch of backline people, because you can just ult the Jarvan and immediately send the. Or if you have like one or two people who dive, right? It's a good way of knocking them back, but.
Well, and the thing is like the best part about those games for me was like watching Monty figure it out. He's like, I don't know what the hell is happening.
Yeah.
Like, this is great.
And then he got the epiphany.
And then he's like, oh my god, she's ulting the tank. Why is she ulting the tank? That's so stupid. She doesn't do any damage. And then like he sees the scatter of the week like hit 4 people, and he's like,
oh,
I've seen the light.
and they just win. Or like I don't think the first ult was that glorious. He basically just ulted and disengaged. But like it was a great disengage, and it's.
Yeah. No, it's still
skill support, but it's a sweet one skill support, and it's a Syndra, so it's exciting.
Yeah, it was interesting, that's for sure. And I guess up until 6, you have that lane bully pressure too, right?
Yeah,
so base damages are pretty high. So.
Insane. Yeah, and her level 6 all-in is
good,
pretty ridiculous. Like just a single rotation and then adding her ult and she probably doesn't have ignite at that point. She probably has exhaust. Well, I'm not sure.
Plus, with how easy it is to land her stun, very good setup for ganks.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's very long range too, so you can set up some really long range. Like by the time they get like, oh god, something's happening, we have to run. Like, nah, you're still in stun range. You've done for.
Yeah, it's not like any support where you almost have to use flash to get the stun.
Yeah.
All right.
Basically.
So earlier I referred to Huya Tigers as Huya Tigers. They're now GE Tigers. I apologize to everyone who followed up. They got a name change almost right before the season started. GE, I guess, is now their sponsor. And they had a set of games versus Incredible Miracle that I wasn't too. It was.
I was pretty quick.
They were pretty quick. Mm-hmm. We saw Kog'Maw come back very briefly, and we saw just a really good team fighting kind of comp come out from GE in game 1. I don't know. I wasn't impressed with these games. How did you guys feel about them?
I didn't really think there was anything important from them.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Steven. It was kind of just like the Tigers played pretty well. They're looking like they could be a good team. I mean, for as much crap as people gave them with like Prey and shit, like I don't know, they look like they could be good. Like that bot lane still performs well, and Smeb's doing fine in the top lane. They're going to be interesting. I'm excited to see if that team actually can place in that top two. We'll have to see.
All right. I like Frozen. I like a lot of the mid laners this season, so I'll
Yeah.
keep watching IM games. But I don't know. Korea's weird this season, and it's hard. It's hard for me to get excited about anything, especially with
Yeah.
SKT losing to CJ. Like that ruined the last hype train.
It's just so weird that so many people left. You know what I mean? Like it's just so like it's really weird to go back and watch. Like okay, Korean League.
It's
Wait,
just completely
Where's
different.
where's
Only
Kakao?
game.
Where's
If Monte
Scott,
Cristo
where's
and Doa
Braun?
weren't casting Korea, I wouldn't even think it was the
yeah.
same scene. No one could convince me that it was the same scene.
Yeah, I know what you mean. You're kind of just like, really? But hopefully that level of play will start to come. We'll get up there a little bit because I think, for being completely honest, Korea is definitely not. It's not as like awe-striking right now as it was the beginning of, or at the end, towards the end of last season, where you watch some of those teams play and you're like, wow, these teams are so good. And like I think even the KT Arrows from last season would just dump truck almost every team, other than maybe SKT.
I still feel that way about Najin for the most part. I still really like Najin. I'm still impressed with the way that Najin plays. OQ especially is like just the more I watch, the more excited I am.
He's very good.
Emily Rand put it best when she described OQ as like a weapon. You just like you leave him alone and you let him load himself up in the bot lane, and then you just like hope to God someone knows how to tell him what to do in a team fight, because he really does look lost when someone's not like communicating where he needs to be at all times. But when it happens, he looks unstoppable, and he just gets to like have those Tristana team fights where he leaps through everything and just murders people. So there's our new hype 80 carry now that Imp and Deft are gone. So I'm still excited, but I agree it's not quite the same level. Is there anything else we'd like to talk about regarding Korea?
Nope.
All right. Our final topic and kind of our closer for the night is LPL and CBLOL, which is the Brazilian league, are going to be starting this week. This coming week. And obviously, this cast not as full of Brazilian law experts without Emily Rand, and obviously without Kelsey here. We don't have quite the hour to 2 hours of LPL material we would normally have. But let's talk about it at least briefly. What teams are you excited about in LPL, or what players?
Go ahead.
No, you go.
Okay. I'm just really excited to see how Imp does. Because China's been long touted as this region of 80 carries, and now you have them all in the same region. Like you literally took the best 80 carries from Korea, who in Imp and Deft, who were the two that were being thrown around as maybe the best 80 in the world. Now you're putting them in the same region, so they get to play not just a few games against Name and Uzi and all these other guys, but like a lot of games. And it'll be interesting to see. Now we really get to see. It's almost like we have been given the 80 carry ladder in one region. Like we can just see how it goes now. So that's what I'm most excited to see, is which 80 carry really says, okay, you guys all think you're the best in the world? Nah, I'm the best in the world. Like that's what I'm most excited for in this LPL coming up.
So week 1, I think the most exciting matchup, one of the most exciting matchups is going to be EDG versus King. They have a long and storied history. They have met many times in offline tournaments. I have detailed some of those on my blog, which you can find on my Twitter page. But these teams know each other quite well, and this will be a really, really interesting match that will definitely kind of set the pace for how these teams will interact over the whole year. Another exciting match, probably for Western fans who don't know as much about LPL, it will be OMG versus VG. VG Gaming is the team that has Mata and Dandy on it, and then OMG just recently acquired Uzi.
And still has good going. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
But they got Uzi,
So-
guys, the one player you know.
Yeah, so these are kind of some names that people that's going to be definitely a good match. And then the finisher is that finishes week 1 on the 18th of January will be EDG versus Vici Gaming. Once again, Dandy, Mata, Vasily versus the EDG roster now with Deft. So those are my kind of 3 matches to watch. Yeah.
Steven, do you have anything to add before we move on over to Brazil?
No, I already said I don't know too much about China, but I did like what I saw from King.
Sky.
Yeah, King looks really good. Yeah.
Yes.
Sky. I think people are going to be looking towards their favorite Koreans as this region starts to kick up, but I guarantee that people will find an interest. I'm a big King fan after spending far too many hours in the Skype chat with these fine folks, and most notably Hermit, who is just loves King to a ridiculous degree. But
Yes.
King is
They're
exciting.
so predictable. They're so predictable in their losses.
Anyway,
They literally do the same thing, which is look clueless every single time.
all right. So Brazilian League of Legends, I think, is something that we're even less qualified to talk about. I shouldn't have said we're all not qualified to talk about LPL because Hermit, I do think you know a reasonable amount, especially when it comes to King. But
Thanks.
I know no one here knows anything about BR. I know that,
No.
sure. So
I know like bits and pieces because I've had the fortune
Yeah.
of editing all of Emily Rand's pieces. That she's doing all the team previews for CBLOL, but I don't know nearly as
Well,
much as I would like to.
Yeah, well, she talks a lot in the chat, which is nice. She tells us things. But I will admittedly say that most of the Brazil stuff kind of I haven't really started watching it yet. I'm hoping I will this season coming up, and then I'll actually. But I'm pretty bad with names, so when people are just throwing around names and I don't even like associate them with anything, they're just players. It's kind of hard for me to keep track.
all right. Well, for those of you who don't know, I'll give you a brief rundown. INTS is my favorite team to come out of BR.
INTS,
They are solo queue all-stars put together, known to have an incredible laning phase, known to suck at macro strategy, except mysteriously in the last months or so in their recent tournament showings, they apparently have figured macro strategy out, which means that they're looking really strong. Pain Gaming is like the classic BR team, if anyone knows of them. Their streamers are frequently on the top on Twitch. They're always exciting. Keyed Stars imported Daydream and Emperor.
Yeah.
That's the team that looks really good, right?
Yeah, the 2 Korean imports, they do look pretty poised to take stuff. Obviously, I'm not super qualified to talk too much about this, but if you guys want any more info about BR, about CBLOL, in general, always feel free to hit up Emily Rand on Twitter at League of Emily, or check out her articles on Paravine. She's doing a preview series right now about CBLOL and all of the teams there. And then, of course, if you want more information about LPL, feel free to hit up Hermit or anyone else on this cast. Or if you want really good information, hit up anyone from the China Talk roster. They did just do a preview episode, I'm pretty sure, to give everybody all the need-to-know info for LPL as it starts. And I think that's actually going to do it for us for episode 16 of Paravine's Into the Rift. You can find us on Twitter at Paravine Network, or here on hitbox.tv/Paravine every Tuesday at 4:30 p.m. or 7:30 p.m. if you're on the East Coast. Before we say goodbye, because I know Dave's going to want to kiss, is there anything else, any shout-outs anyone wants to give?
No, just everybody who actually sticks through and watches this thing as usual. Thank you.
Yeah, pretty
Yeah,
much.
Thanks so
Shout
much.
out my
guys.
boy
Thanks for tuning
Veteran.
in.
Yeah, follow everybody. Goodbye.
All right.
Mwah.
Dave.